The hum of distant chaos filtered through the air, an ominous backdrop to what should have been an ordinary day at the base. Soldiers moved in predictable rhythms, morning drills, equipment checks, and idle chatter that echoed off the barracks walls. Captain Mason leaned against a Humvee, arms crossed, scanning the yard. His team was a reliable mix, seasoned veterans and bright-eyed rookies, all bound by unspoken trust. The calm felt fragile, as though the universe itself held its breath. The first sign was a sound, low, guttural, and unrelenting. It rolled across the horizon, silencing conversations and snapping heads toward the city skyline. Mason's sharp eyes caught it first, a flash of unnatural light arcing down like an angry god's hammer. A moment of stunned silence followed, then the ground trembled, and a plume of fire erupted into the sky. "Jesus, what the hell was that?" muttered Corporal Lang, gripping his rifle like it could explain the inexplicable. Mason's voice cut through the rising panic, calm and authoritative. "Lang, get the comms up. Recon team, with me. Let's figure out what we're dealing with." As reports poured in, chaos solidified into something tangible and far worse. The explosion wasn't isolated. Similar impacts were reported across the globe, each bringing with it the same eerie phenomenon, flames that defied logic. These fires consumed everything, burning in hues of cyan and violet, spreading as though they were alive. Mason's orders were clear: secure the perimeter, assess the situation, and prepare for deployment. But clarity didn't dispel the gnawing uncertainty. The base's perimeter alarms blared as a column of evacuees approached from the city, their faces masks of ash and fear. Civilians spoke in fragmented sentences, describing fire that chased them, heat that screamed, and a sensation of being watched. Mason's squad geared up, the weight of their mission pressing down as they prepared to enter an inferno of unknown origin. The drive toward the city was unnervingly quiet, save for the crackle of flames that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. The first sight of the impact zone left the squad momentarily breathless. Skyscrapers that once kissed the clouds now lay shattered, their steel skeletons twisted by the unnatural blaze. The fire moved unnaturally, licking at the wreckage like a predator savoring its prey. Mason caught sight of a lone figure, an elderly man clutching a child, trapped near the edge of the flames. Without hesitation, he motioned to his squad. "Get them out," he barked. They obeyed without question, their actions efficient despite the looming presence of something far beyond their understanding. The old man's trembling voice whispered a warning as they pulled him to safety. "It's alive," he muttered. "The fire. It thinks." Mason locked eyes with Lang, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was no ordinary disaster. Whatever it was, it had come for them. And humanity wasn't ready. The streets leading to the impact zone were unrecognizable, shrouded in thick smoke that turned the midday sun into a dim, coppery glow. Rubble and abandoned vehicles littered the roads, and the unnatural fire loomed in the distance, casting a pulsating, otherworldly light. Captain Mason's squad moved in tight formation, each step deliberate as their boots crunched over shattered glass and scorched debris. The air was heavy, a strange metallic tang clinging to every breath. Mason signaled for a halt, his eyes fixed on the flickering wall of flame ahead. It wasn't like any fire they'd encountered before. It didn't roar or crackle, it hummed, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in their bones. The flames danced with a disturbing fluidity, shifting in patterns that almost seemed intentional. Mason exchanged a glance with Corporal Lang, who muttered under his breath, "This isn't just fire. It's something else." A faint cry broke through the oppressive stillness. Mason turned sharply, scanning the wreckage until he spotted a small group of civilians huddled in a partially collapsed building. Without waiting for orders, Private Harris moved toward them, but Mason held up a hand, stopping him. "Slow. We don't know how this thing reacts." The squad approached cautiously, keeping their weapons at the ready. As they drew closer, the flames seemed to shift their focus, tendrils of fire curling toward the group. Harris cursed under his breath as his radio crackled with static. "It's like it knows we're here," he said, voice taut. The civilians were in bad shape, burns, smoke inhalation, and terror etched into their faces. Mason crouched beside an older woman, her hands trembling as she clutched a makeshift cloth mask to her face. "We're here to help," he said firmly, his calm demeanor cutting through her panic. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, and Mason motioned for the squad to start evacuating them. As they moved, the flames advanced, their movement eerily coordinated. Lang aimed his rifle and fired a warning shot into the fire. The bullet disappeared into the flames, but the fire recoiled momentarily, as though startled. "Did you see that?" Lang whispered. "It reacted." "Keep moving," Mason ordered, his voice steady despite the rising tension. The squad formed a protective barrier around the civilians, guiding them through the wreckage. The humming grew louder, and the flames surged, cutting off their escape route. "Think, Mason," he muttered to himself, scanning the surroundings. His eyes landed on a nearby fire hydrant. "Harris, get it open. Flood the area." Harris nodded and sprang into action, smashing the hydrant with the butt of his rifle. Water erupted in a chaotic spray, dousing the flames momentarily and creating a narrow path. The squad pushed through, dragging the civilians to safety. Mason turned back to see the flames retreat slightly, then reassemble, their movements deliberate and almost predatory. He didn't know what they were up against, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just a fire. It was alive, and it was watching. The squad regrouped at a temporary command post set up on the city's outskirts, their faces marked with soot and exhaustion. The rescued civilians were being tended to by medics, but their haunting descriptions of the flames echoed in Mason's mind. "It's alive. It thinks." The words gnawed at him. This was unlike anything they'd prepared for, but retreat wasn't an option. Lieutenant Carter, the base's science officer, stepped into the makeshift briefing room, clutching a tablet loaded with hastily gathered data. "The fire isn't fire," she began, her voice tight with urgency. "It's a form of energy-based life. It's feeding on the heat and matter it consumes, but it's not random. It's reacting to us." Mason leaned forward. "Can it be stopped?" Carter hesitated, then nodded. "Possibly. We've picked up low-frequency pulses within the flames. They're organized, almost like communication. If we disrupt that signal, we might be able to neutralize it, or at least slow it down." The squad exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation settling over them. Mason straightened. "What do we need?" Carter outlined her plan, explaining how their standard EMP equipment could be modified to emit specific frequencies. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was the best shot they had. The team worked quickly, stripping wires and recalibrating devices with a precision born of desperation. Harris muttered as he worked, "This is crazy. We're fighting fire with radio waves." "Crazy's all we've got," Lang shot back, tightening a cable. As the modified equipment came online, Carter ran a test on a small sample of the flames, which they'd managed to isolate in a containment unit. When the device activated, the fire reacted violently, thrashing within its enclosure before collapsing into a wisp of smoke. "It works," Carter confirmed, her voice tinged with both relief and caution. "But this was a controlled environment. Out there, it'll fight back harder." Mason nodded, his jaw set. "Then we make it count." The squad prepared for a field test, armed with the modified devices. They returned to the edge of the impact zone, where the flames still raged with unnatural intensity. As they activated the first device, the flames recoiled sharply, their humming growing into an angry, discordant wail. "Keep pushing!" Mason shouted, leading the charge. The devices emitted pulses that caused the flames to writhe and shrink, but the fire adapted quickly, surging toward the team in concentrated tendrils. Lang fired his rifle into the advancing flames, buying time for Harris to deploy another device. The air was electric with tension as the battle unfolded. Each step forward was met with resistance, the flames growing more aggressive as though realizing their survival was at stake. Carter's voice crackled over the radio. "Stay together. The signal strength weakens if you spread out." Mason's team pressed on, their movements synchronized, their resolve unshaken despite the mounting danger. For every inch they gained, the flames seemed to lash out with greater fury. But as the final device was activated, a ripple of disruption surged through the fire. It faltered, its movements growing erratic before retreating, leaving behind a scorched but silent wasteland. Mason lowered his weapon, his chest heaving as he surveyed the aftermath. It wasn't a victory yet, but for the first time, they'd forced the flames to retreat. They'd bought humanity a fighting chance. The flames had retreated, but the battle was far from over. Mason's squad regrouped at the command post, their bodies worn but their minds sharper than ever. They'd proven the modified devices could disrupt the entity, but it was clear the fire wasn't just retreating, it was recalibrating. Every soldier understood the stakes. This wasn't a fight for a city, it was a fight for survival. Lieutenant Carter wasted no time, working with engineers and technicians to enhance the devices. "We need to scale this up," she explained to Mason, her voice strained but resolute. "What we used was enough to push it back, but it's adapting faster than we can keep up. If we're going to end this, we need to hit it with everything we've got, all at once." Mason listened intently, his gaze steady. "What's the risk?" Carter hesitated. "The EMP blast we're planning will neutralize the entity, but it'll take out everything within range: electronics, communications, infrastructure. It's a scorched earth approach." Mason nodded slowly. Better scorched earth than no earth. The plan was finalized. Teams across the region synchronized their efforts, preparing to deploy the enhanced devices at strategic points around the city. The goal was to create a containment field, forcing the flames into a concentrated area where they would unleash a final, overwhelming EMP pulse. As the squad moved into position, Mason addressed his team. "This is it. We've got one shot to end this. No room for hesitation. No room for failure. Remember what we're fighting for: each other, the people out there, and everyone depending on us. Let's finish this." The deployment began at sunset, the dying light casting an eerie glow over the devastated city. The squad moved quickly and efficiently, setting up the devices while the flames stirred in the distance, their humming now a low, menacing growl. It was as though the entity sensed what was coming. As the devices activated, the flames reacted violently, surging toward the team with a ferocity they hadn't seen before. Tendrils of fire lashed out, forcing them to fight for every second. Lang covered Harris as he connected the final device, firing bursts into the advancing fire. "Almost there," Harris yelled, sweat dripping down his face. The last device came online, and the containment field snapped into place. The flames writhed, their movements growing frantic as they were forced into the center of the zone. Mason watched as the entity's behavior shifted, its earlier aggression replaced by something almost desperate. For a moment, he felt a pang of unease. Was it truly alive? And if so, what were they destroying? Carter's voice broke through his thoughts. "Detonation in 10 seconds. Get clear." The squad retreated, their eyes fixed on the blazing mass trapped within the containment field. The final pulse activated, and a blinding wave of energy erupted, swallowing the flames in a deafening silence. When the light faded, the flames were gone. The humming had ceased. The city was eerily quiet, the once roaring inferno replaced by smoldering ruins and an overwhelming stillness. Mason stood at the edge of the blast zone, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the aftermath. They had won, but the cost was evident. The city lay in ruins, and the survivors faced an uncertain future. Yet, in that moment, Mason felt a flicker of hope. Humanity had faced the unthinkable and prevailed, not with brute force alone, but with ingenuity, courage, and an unyielding will to survive. As the first rays of dawn broke through the ash-laden sky, Mason turned to his squad. "We've got work to do. Let's help them rebuild." Without another word, they moved forward, ready to face whatever came next.